Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's edition of the Richard Urban Show. I am your host, Richard Urban, coming to you from historic Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Today's episode is Satan was the first pedophile. I'd like to start with a scripture reading. This is from Peace Message 17 from Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Second, we must accomplish a revolution in educating all people on the value of absolute sexual ethics. That is, on the Constitution of Heaven, with God as its vertical absolute axis. This is the only way to pass on the true good lineage to all humankind. That is a path to achieving God's ideal of true families. From now on, sexual purity, purity of lineage, and purity of love will be the educational philosophy of the true human race. This is from Original Substance of the Divine Principle. Origin, division, union, action is the action which God stands in the origin position, and division extends from him, with the division next being reunited again in oneness. So you see God here, a man and a woman, as an example for its foundation children. This contrasts with the satanic theory of dialectical materialism or communism, where you have a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis based on conflict and hatred. Rather, God's principle is one you have an origin in God, the divided entities of plus and minus or male and female are divided parts from God, and they reunite to form a union. That would be a sexual union, which can also produce children. So it involves give and receive action, not confrontation and struggle, through three stages: origin, division, and union. In this issue, I'd like to address the whole transgender issue and agenda. So we see with the tragic murders in Tennessee, in Nashville recently, a very violent expression of transgenderism. And I'd like to posit and say that that is a natural, in the sense that it follows in progression, a natural conclusion of the whole transgender agenda. Because what are you doing through transgenderism? Saying that a person who is a biological sex can become a person of the opposite sex. And by the way, I was just watching Matt Walsh's excellent documentary, What is a Woman? And he's talking about that. So I recommend you see that. It's on Twitter right now for free. This is June 4th. So the whole thing is that you're practicing violence against God. Because God, as I just showed in the diagram, has his principle of creation. That's Genesis 1:28. But it's much more clearly explained in the unification principle and also the original substance of the divine principle, that God expresses his dual characteristics of male and female through men and women, and then through their union, their sexual union, they create oneness, and that is an intimate part of God's plan. That is God's plan. And that, of course, is how children are produced. So the whole agenda of the homosexual movement, and even more radically the transgender, is to destroy God's ideal. And if you'll notice, the transgender movement is also linked to the transhumanism, the idea that human beings can be God. They can extend their life. They can do anything they want through technology. This is really evil and satanic. Of course, technology can be used for God's purpose, but this kind of idea to discard God and be God yourself, that is the whole idea behind transhumanism. And really, it's the idea behind transgenderism. So we see, like in George Barna's recent research, where some 40% of the Generation Z, the youngest current generation, are saying, oh, they identify as something other than male or female. wait a minute, 40% when the real number of transgender people who have gender dysphoria is like somewhere between 1 in 30,000 and 1 in 100,000. What's going on? Well, clearly it's indoctrination of the education system where you have teachers who are believing this ideology and a whole agenda of comprehensive sex education and everything else going on in that area. So this is going to be the first of 3 parts I'm going to talk about in the next one about John Money and the whole fraud behind the whole transgender phenomenon. And finally, what we can do actively to promote a solution, not just be against this phenomenon, but to promote a solution to this. So, like I said, this is violence against God, against God's ideal. And really, when you think about it, the title, Satan was the first pedophile, that comes from the fact that in the unification principle, we understand that the fall of man was a premature sexual relationship. And you can and should study the unification principle to know this. If you're going to know this, you're going to understand the principle of creation, which I was just showing a part of in the diagram, then you're going to understand clearly God's ideal. Whatever is against God's ideal is evil. So there's no question about, is it okay to be transgender or homosexual? No, it's not okay. Does that mean we hate homosexual people? No, not at all. We being, people who are God-centered should be compassionate, but that doesn't mean we agree with evil or people's confusion. This is an insane idea that 12 or 13-year-olds can decide what even is right and wrong. What are adults doing, even allowing these things to happen? In some cases, they happen against the will of the adults because of crazy or evil laws, whether it be in Canada or California or other states, saying that 12-year-olds can decide by themselves. Washington, D.C. is such a jurisdiction. That's actually been the fact for, I think, 2+ decades in Washington, D.C. Hello, D.C. residents, if you didn't know. 12-year-old girls can have an abortion without parental consent. So if the school or someone guides them or they decide through social media or however to get an abortion, they can actually get an abortion and the abortionist is not even required to tell the parents. Hello, what parent would think that's all right? I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, none of the above. How can that be all right? That's child abuse. So all these these things that indoctrinate children in public schools, or for that matter in private schools or anywhere else, they're completely obviously wrong, and we can see clearly wrong. They're wrong because they go against God's ideal, and they also go against common sense. So how did these things come about? Well, there was a strong movement as late as even, I'd say, about 2008 for marriage between a man and woman. You remember the Defense of Marriage Act was passed in California. And in many other states, it had passed. I think some 30 states. But then in 2015, the Supreme Court magically came up with a right in the Constitution to same-sex, quote-unquote, marriage. And then the original argument was, of course, we don't want to deprive homosexual people from seeing their partner in the hospital. But, of course, it's actually been used as a hammer and a bat to beat people to accept this kind of insane agenda. Because most people, don't really care what people do in their bedroom, so to speak. But no, that's not the idea at all. And one of the goals all along is to force you to accept the agenda. That's the idea. And in fact, that's the transgender movement. So it started out the same way. We want to come in schools and teach anti-bullying. But if you read the testimonies like they have on the Epoch Times and other places about those who were formerly working in the transgender movement, No, that's just the excuse to go in the schools. It's really to indoctrinate children. And in fact, you know, people have testified that they left the transgender movement when they found out that people really didn't care, even if uh, some of these transgender people had sex with children. So that's basically what's going on. And in fact, as I pointed out previously, prior to political correctness, I'd say prior to about 1980, the homosexual movement was basically more out front. Like there was the Man-Boy Love Association. It's still around, but you're not going to hear them advertising that. Oh, we're with the Man-Boy Love Association, and we'd like to have sex with children. Isn't that wonderful? No. It's all this other stuff that they put up in front. Oh, we want violent people like Richard Urban to stop talking. No, it's not people like me that are violent. It's them who are violent by forcing this crap on our kids and on other people, and also by trying to promote things like that you can change your gender. That's inherently violent. Cutting off your penis is violent. Trying to cut pieces of your arm out is violent. If you're a woman, like cut pieces of your skin out and try to make a penis, that's violent. It's inherently violent, cutting yourself up. And the argument they make is totally opposite of the truth. Oh, we have to allow this. If you don't allow your child to transition, they're going to kill themselves. No, the actual studies show that, in fact, 7 to 10 years after they transition, as was pointing out in Matt Walsh's excellent movie there, they're much more likely to kill themselves. So they say exactly the opposite of the truth. People who are gender confused are more likely to kill themselves. And in fact, we can see in the tragic Tennessee case, more likely to kill other people too. So this is completely the opposite of the truth. So like I said, this is going to be a 3-part series. I wanted to give a little more of the spiritual perspective, how this is a revolt against God and an attempt to destroy God's ideal. And the next part, I'm going to talk about John Money and the total fraud of the whole idea of transitioning someone to a different gender, that would even ever be a thing, and how that came about to begin with. And then the third part, I'm going to talk about a proactive solution. Really, I see as the only solution. So I hope you'll stay tuned in. I hope you'll like and share this video and podcast and share it with your friends. Also subscribe to Daily Inspiration at visionroot.org, inspiration.visionroot.org. And I thank you very much for listening today. And do be blessed. And we will see you next time.